Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
What's new?
Not a lot new under the sun. That's what they say. I think that's a phrase that people say in casual
Nothing
conversation.
New under the sun.
I mean, talking about casual conversation, that's one of those things I'm really bad at. Like, I don't like it when I am forced to have a social interaction that I with someone new. It's maybe that introverted part of me, and I feel I'll get in my own head and I'll be like, this is really a lot of work to have this conversation right now because I'm asking questions that I don't really care about the answers to. And sometimes those questions take many forms, but one of those questions would be, what's your most memorable Halloween costume you ever wore?
Yeah,
and then
Okay.
Quite
So
a
you're
question.
making some casual conversation with us.
I mean, because this is quite. I mean, I have this conversation a lot in October.
Yeah.
You
know,
do?
when you're
This
You're
is
planning
like
you're talking to the
planning
neighbor. You're like, this is weird. You know, how's the weather? You know, that's kind of the how's the weather of October. What's your weirdest Halloween costume? Most memorable?
So what is it?
For me, so we didn't do traditional Halloween as a kid. We went to church and we had what we call no trick, we treat. So basically we did Halloween, but
we redeemed the holiday.
We redeemed it. We showed up at church, and then we actually came with a bag that we would give to people. We would knock on their door, say, no trick, we treat, and we'd give them, candy.
A bag of Chick Tracts.
No, and then there was usually like an invitation to the church, but then we would also get candy back. So it was basically like we did. And then there'd be Halloween, there'd be costume contests, things like that.
Cool.
I think my most memorable, though, and most people probably won't know this unless you subscribe to Right Now Media through Christ Community Church. McGee and Me.
Oh.
There was a McGee and Me was a show.
I love McGee
I'm
and
making
Me.
the
A
connection.
cartoon, and he had like huge, eyebrows, and he was blonde, and so like I remember my parents like, spray painting my hair yellow and like big old eyebrows, and I was the coolest Christian kid that year.
Wow.
Nobody whose house I went to had a clue. Who
are you? McGee.
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm yellow eyebrows, man.
That's it for me.
Yeah, I thought you were just going to tell my story.
You also dressed as McGee and Me?
Well, just the setup. We didn't go trick-or-treating. We went to church. I'm like, oh, he's just going to go straight down. I think my most memorable costume, let's see, I was probably in third grade. This was Wichita, Kansas. It was a church Halloween event, and we all dressed up as our favorite Bible
Hallelujah
kid.
Hoedown? Is that what it was called?
It was probably one of those. It was always something different. But I remember I dressed up as Moses as a third grader.
Did your staff do cool tricks?
We didn't have a staff. What are you talking about? It was,
It was Eric.
It was my dad. I think
No,
he
I
was
meant
the
your
one.
staff. Like you throw it down and turn it. Like Moses. Yeah. There's a Bible story, and Moses had a staff he threw down and it turned to a serpent.
Oh, that kind of a staff?
Yeah.
No. Oh, you broke me.
Sorry.
Eric's going to start giggling.
Yeah, no, I just put a bunch of baby powder in my hair. Well, my mom did. And so I had white hair, and just the whole night I was leaving trails of dust everywhere I went. And I had like a weird toga, and I did actually have a staff. Like now that you mention it, for some reason my dad had like a sheep herder's staff. He probably used it as a sermon illustration or something, and yeah.
So was this only for people at church, or did you guys actually go like into the community?
This was not an outreach thing.
Okay.
This was like, very insular.
So everyone knew you were Moses.
I mean, they were like, you're a Bible character, or I don't know.
Yeah.
That was
Cool.
Did you sing
awkward.
Pharaoh, ooh, baby, let my
baby.
people go?
I don't think that song was
Yeah.
a thing. Yeah.
okay.
I mean,
I'm sorry.
yeah. I'm too old for that.
We'll
song.
teach you it.
I know the
later.
song.
Oh.
I just, at the time, I don't
Okay.
think. I do remember I was a big fan of DC Talk at that age, and I was writing a Halloween Moses rap, and I wish I remembered how it went, but I'm sure it was good.
Which is just wild that Toby Mac is still going, and he looks the same age.
Go Toby.
Mm-hmm.
Way to rock that makeup.
I'll have to talk about when I went to his house one time. But that's for another episode.
Oh, okay. I can't
teaser,
wait.
Eric.
Maybe we can get him on the pod sometime.
Yeah, maybe. I grew up, did not celebrate Halloween ever. My family, so I've never dressed up as a child. Never did that. But we did something at our church that also happened apparently on October 31st, which is Reformation Day. And so that's what we would have, like a Reformation celebration, and we would like nail the 95 Theses onto the door, and like all things
really
related
fun.
to Martin Luther.
Did candy come out of it when you did that? Was it a
There was candy somehow
theses?
involved.
Oh.
There was like themes around all the games around the Reformation, and I can't remember except nailing the 95 Theses on a piece of wood. However, it was really fun for me then, having kids, to be able to dress up. So I did dress up as an adult, like in my 30s.
Okay.
I'm sure somebody who's relating to this, like, never did. But the first time I ever dressed up, I was a Christmas tree, and Ben went as Santa. And then our kids were like Power Rangers or something. But it was just fun to be able to do that as a family, because we just have fun with it now. And so it's been a fun thing that I didn't get to do. And it's not like I am mad at my parents for that decision, but it's just something fun that now I'm getting to experience as an adult with my kids.
It's a holiday that definitely has evolved. I mean, every church does a trunk or treat, it feels like now. Like we do one, at CCC, and I think it's fun, but it's a different way to embrace, Halloween, still in a safe way, and give kids candy and all those experiences. But it feels like a lot of churches used to do these more insular events, like it was about them and let's keep them away from evil. And now I do think the church has moved forward as a whole into like, hey, how do we take this, get plugged into the community, not overly celebrate the evil parts of it, because I think there are, some parts of it that aren't the best.
Well, there are parts of it that are evil.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, in that.
But I think the church has embraced it a lot more and become more open, and let's invite people to be a part of it and not make it awkward. So show up,
agreed.
Trunk or treat. That'll be fun.
There you go.
Well, Moses and McGee.
Yeah,
Thank
Moses
you.
and McGee. That's our new podcast coming out soon.
Thank you.
It's just me and Alex talking about Halloween.
Making up raps.
That's our rap names. Yeah, we're gonna start a new Christian rap group. I'm excited for this. Moses,
that's a
McGee
rap, huh?
Dropping soon. So we figured, since we've had a lot of weeks of guests, and we, sometimes it doesn't always leave room for headlines. We thought this week, let's make up for it with a headline mega show where we talk about some of the headlines that are affecting the culture around us right now. So that's up next. So the plan is that we each bring a headline that we wanted to talk about for this episode, something going on in culture. Alex, you wanted to talk about Justin Bieber and his new Cannabis for a Cause, which I have a real quick story I wanted to share. Shout out to my wife, Christina, if you're listening.
I like her.
We were eating dinner one night, and she was talking about the Peaches song, from Justin Bieber. It's I get my peaches down in Georgia.
Yeah,
something. And I get my weed from California. She brought that song up, and I don't remember exactly in what context it happened, but she was asking about why he, got his wheat from California. And are they known for growing wheat?
That's awesome.
Which I think makes sense.
I could definitely, now that you say it, I could hear weed.
The awkward thing was my 10-year-old son is sitting there squirming in his seat. Do I tell mom that she's wrong? Because then that would they'd know that I knew what weed was, and he was nervous and not, and it was just the funniest thing. And I mean, she works in an industry that deals with grain and stuff a lot, so I think her brain's just
automatically. That totally makes sense.
So where do you get your wheat from?
Honey bunches of wheats. That's
Wheaties?
oats. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do eat my Wheaties. No, I thought this is interesting conversation. One, I think because Justin Bieber, he's one of those people that I think in culture as a whole has been fully embraced. And then he's been a guy that's like dove pretty hard, I think, into his faith and Christianity, especially, you know, over the last few years. Came out, we talked about it over Easter with an EP that was really faith-based. Purpose was another album he came out with. And so he's really kind of represented. I mean, if you follow him on Instagram and things like that, he's always talking about the image of God people are made in. And so
doing a lot of worship sets lately.
Worship sets. And so he's like one of those people that I'm like, every time I feel like he takes a step forward towards Christianity, then he does something that I'm like, oh, is that good? Is that not good? And so even coming out with this album overall, like there was just, I'm like, language, I'm like, you could have curbed some of the language and some of that kind of stuff. But then I think the bigger part of this was when he talks about weed. And then I think in culture, weed, I think, is becoming one of those things that is more and more acceptable. And so I just think of, you know, when I was a kid, you know, marijuana, weed, you know, whatever names we had for it was just so pervasively bad. It was illegal in every state. And now we're like at a point where I think in culture there's a bigger turning point happening around education and weed and how people use it and the benefits of that I think as Christians we have to start to inform ourselves about this. And so I think it's one of those things that is important, and we have to look at data and specifics and try to figure out just how weed shapes the culture and how we are going to respond to that, because it's not going away. And in fact, I think it's going to be one of those things that we talk about, we debate about much more in politics. 18 states now have a legal form of weed. I just got back from Colorado. I didn't smoke any weed, but it was just much more like everywhere, accessible. You know, you've like, I looked up drugstore because I was trying to find like a Walgreens, and there's like more than just Walgreens pop up, and that's not
brings new meaning to drugstore.
And so I'm just curious, like for both of you, like what's that transition been like in understanding of weed as a drug, and just as you've navigated that over just your lifetime?
I feel like growing up, it was the same. Like, this is a no-go. I mean, we grew up during like DARE, don't do drugs. And so everything was kind of lumped into one thing as being super terrible and bad. And so I think I just kind of grew up even through high school feeling that same way. And I would say like even just oblivious to its accessibility, like how would I get it, anything like that. And then having just people in my family and that have been close to me that have struggled with addiction, I guess kind of made it a little more triggering for me. But as I went into my master's, I went through, and as I was getting my clinical counseling degree, I also was getting my licensed drug and alcohol counseling degree as well, and just learning more about it. And during that time, just understanding like, why are people doing it other than just getting stoned? And just like really, like I really had to stop and try to understand the deeper meaning of what are people using this for outside of just judging what it does, because I didn't understand it. So to me, it's like if I don't understand it, I have to withhold some judgment. That's just how I look at things, especially in counseling. Like I need to like dive deeper into things. And then I worked at Open Door Mission for 3 years, and that's just a lot of untreated mental illness, but drugs are very accessible, including weed. It's probably one of the most accessible. And then I worked at a toxicology lab, and I did drug testing on people. And I saw for the first time in Omaha, like somebody that had a medical marijuana card. So then it's like, okay, people are using it for different reasons. And I think that's kind of where the tension started coming for me, is like something that we grew up with, like, this is not okay. Someone else is using for a medicinal purpose given by a doctor. And then just the struggle of, you know, how is it used for epilepsy and all these things. And I think it's just been interesting over the past couple of years how it's evolved so quickly. You said 19 states. That's like 1/3 of
18, but yeah,
18. So it's almost like 1/3 of our states have legalized marijuana. And I remember when they were pushing for legalization that it was to counteract the opioid epidemic, which is like I think still should be on everybody's radar, but it's still
really
like
bad.
something where opioids are still there, but it's not really counteracting it.
Is one of the worst with an opioid dependency.
So I think like from a therapeutic standpoint, like, and as a Christian, I've been a little more reserved in my judgment of, okay, why are we using it? Why are you using it? And I hate to be this full on labeler of people when I don't understand, because I think there's a lot of negative connotations that come with it. But there's a lot I don't understand too.
Yeah, I think even from a perspective of just government in general, and as states start to legalize it, obviously it's still illegal at a federal level. But you look at all the people who are in prison right now for possession, and what does that say when these states are just allowing people to have it now? And you've got people in those states who are probably still in prison for what's just allowed, and it just seems so hypocritical. And I mean, it kind of breaks your heart for these people who are in prison on these kind of bogus things at this point. And if this is where we're moving as a country, then that, I think, it should be priority number one, is getting these people out of prison. If they're in prison for possession, and we're not going to be arresting people for that. I mean, as far as morality thing though, I don't know. It's tough because I think the church falls in so many different places, even when it comes to alcohol. I mean, I think a lot of churches would be okay with it in moderation. But, our country has a weird history with alcohol too, with prohibition and things like that. So if it's legal in your state, is that enough for a church to say, well, it's probably okay in moderation because it's something that's illegal by the world's standards? I don't know. I think it's just going to be one of those messy conversations, and it's going to, split people as usual.
Well, I think part of that is we live in a place where it's not equal. Like I said, I mean, going to Colorado last weekend, it's a totally different kind of ball game there. And so even pastoring a church, and like if I moved to California or one of these places that it was legal, my stance would have to be thought out more. Right now, I'm like, okay, it's illegal, in Nebraska, and so that the legality of it is pretty cut and dry. Of like, should you do it? No, because of the legality, and there's ways. I think more and more states are making those avenues available for those who need it. But I do think what you brought up, Eric, is a bigger part of that whole weed conversation, and that's one of the things Justin Bieber, like, so he's partnering with a couple different organizations. So it's Cannabis for a Cause is kind of what he's talking about, and he's partnering with a couple organizations. One, I had it up here, but I lost it.
One for veterans.
Yeah, one for Veteran Walk and Talk, and then the Last Prisoner Project. And really the Last Prisoner Project, what it focuses on is what you were talking about there, Eric, is...
Sorry to jump ahead.
You're fine. Is, they are focusing on justice reform in that. And so one of their things, if you go to their website, says, imagine sitting in a cell for years, decades, or even life, convicted of an activity that is no longer a crime.
Yeah.
And thousands of other people are building wealth off of this now, doing exactly the same thing. And that's the situation for over 40,000 cannabis prisoners in the United States alone. So people that the laws have changed, but they're still incarcerated based on former laws. And I know there's so much awareness. We had Sean Hopwood on here, who's a lawyer now that really is trying to help with prison reform. And even the decriminalization of marijuana was a huge thing that our current president was like a part of his platform that he was running on. And I think to kind of flip a script, because he in the 80s and 90s, and a lot of Congress did, like really laid down some strict laws for drug trafficking and all of those things. It was the war
on drugs.
It was the war on drugs. And so,
but it became a war on minorities and underclass people of all
and the
races
cycle that goes along with that. I have a friend who it wasn't weed, but they got in trouble for drugs and had their record expunged after going through being able to hire a lawyer being able to afford that, one, have a job, have access to be able to go to all the treatment plans and all of the things that were required for them to get that taken off of their record. And now you would never know that if you saw this person that was even something on their record. But for so many people, one of these counts, depending on how it's measured, will keep you from, getting a job. It'll keep you locked in a legal system and all the loopholes that go along with that. And so this conversation, I think, is much bigger than is puff, puff, pass or smoking weed like a bad thing, but all of those things that go along with it and all the legislation. So I think Christians, we really do have to be aware of what's happening here.
I think we have to be aware, and I think taking some time to formulate an opinion, it's not like you have to come up with that right away, but it is probably something that will eventually get to Nebraska. I mean, we're a little bit behind in some things, but it's something where we're probably at some point going to have to make a decision on at some level. I mean, I've had multiple people ask, will you sign this petition to legalize this? But I just think one thing that's interesting about it is, as I'm looking at this subject, just in culture and in Christianity, is I lead an addictions group, and just having the conversation of marijuana, it's not necessarily addictive. It's debatable if it's considered a gateway drug. It depends who you talk to. But just the guys that are in that group, it's just nothing. When we choose sobriety, nothing passes the gateway. It's not that's going to be okay, but I'm going to say no to prescription pills, or I'm going to say no to alcohol, but this is okay. And so I think it's something that we do need to think about, but yeah, there's a lot.
Yep. Right. So I think it's like I said, I think it's something that in culture, it's shaping our culture, the conversations in a big way around this. And Christians, we have to be aware of it. We can't just say, well, it's bad. If that's where you land, you need to have some reason that's actually able to articulate that, and not just weed is bad because my mom and dad told me so and I wore a Dare shirt. I mean,
that worked for us.
Yeah.
That doesn't work for now. Yeah.
Especially when there is more, legalization, and there's success in some of these states.
Well, and even with what he's doing here, I mean, with the Peaches brand on these pre-rolled joints, pretty much. I mean, it's there's, I don't know what else to call it other than a sex appeal. It's becoming more mainstream. It's this attractive box with, pre-rolled marijuana cigarettes or whatever. And it's going to become something that's advertised and marketed to people in a way that it's never been also.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's a lot there. And I think to your point that it worked for us is maybe us in this room.
Right.
But
exactly.
I wouldn't even say across
That's
the
what I was
board,
talking about. Yep.
Dare didn't work on probably a lot of people. And so it's just, again, here's an example of us trying to blame people for a different problem. It's a drug problem, right? Okay, well, we attack the person instead of trying to get them the help that they need, and say that we make them the enemy. And it's a really, really long, drawn out process that we don't seem to learn. I mean, it just keeps happening over and over again.
There's so many just wrong stereotypes about potheads or druggies. There's a lot more people using this than most people know, that aren't just falling into that terrible, kind of narrative of you're a stupid pothead. There's just
absolutely, that's very true, Alex.
The people that I know use it. They probably would shock some people.
All right. Well, I'm going to move on to another headline that's been making the rounds. This one is about the Dave Chappelle Netflix special that recently launched on Netflix. This specific headline from TheVerge.com says Netflix suspends trans employee who tweeted about Dave Chappelle's special. There's a lot to unpack here, and I don't know how much of that we're going to get to. But I'll try to do my best to explain the situation, because I think anytime we talk about anything in culture, whether it's, we talked about, was it Cuties on Netflix and different things like that. it's a weird line that we kind of straddle because it's not something that us as a podcast are recommending. You go watch this thing, or
Right.
go watch Dave Chappelle's special. Like that's in no way what we're asking. But I do think that then when this stuff happens, though, there is a cultural relevance that makes it important to talk about. In Dave Chappelle's special, I would say, well, not this recent one, but one of his earlier ones, he's had 6 with his deal through Netflix. This was his final one. An earlier one, he had made some jokes about the trans community and the LGBT community in general. But, you know, he kind of got labeled as transphobic and different things like that. His latest special deals with this topic a lot. Like the majority of it is him kind of he kind of starts out the special as saying he's going to negotiate for DaBaby's career back, because if you're familiar with DaBaby, he, you know, a rapper that Kanye West recently was kind of, you know, trying to salvage his career, and because he made some very homophobic statements on stage that obviously were offensive. So he kind of, the whole story arc of his stand-up special is kind of about, and I don't want to talk about it out of turn, so I'm going to be really careful. And if I'll probably say something inaccurate, and, you know, people can correct me, but in a lot of ways, he's comparing this outrage machine that's been built around, you know, you can say certain things about, you know, other races and things like that and kind of get away with it. But then, like, anything about the LGBT community, you get canceled. And I think his point is, you know, why is there not more outrage about other things that happen within the Black community or things like that? And and to some extent, he's making kind of crude comparisons and, you know, even uninformed ones. I mean, I think his whole point was that the baby killed a guy in Walmart, and nobody's talking about that. But they're talking about, you know, they're trying to cancel him over the statements he made, which, I mean, if you dig into that, yes, DaBaby did shoot a person in self-defense in Walmart and killed him. But it was like this, you know, it wasn't just like a random murder. Anyways, getting past some of that, this trans employee had tweeted, and then Netflix tweeted saying, this is terrible, whatever, you know, that you could go read it if you want. Netflix suspended them, and everyone assumed that Netflix suspended this employee because of the tweet. Later, it came out that they actually were involved with a few other employees of going to a meeting, an executive meeting that they weren't invited to, and that's why they got suspended. And an update to this story that just recently came out was that Netflix actually reinstated the suspended employees. So that's already kind of been
taken care of.
I think, though, the bigger story here is just how we talk about these sorts of things. And I think that Chappelle is in his own way trying to kind of get this conversation rolling, and whether for better or for worse. And in doing so, the way he wraps up his special is a story about a trans woman that he had a pretty close friendship with, who was an aspiring stand-up comedian, and he would kind of let her open for him and different things like that. And she stood up for Dave when he was getting attacked by the trans community. And in that, and over a course of 6 days, she was ridiculed for this. How can you go against your tribe? Like, what's going on? And she ultimately killed herself. And so on one hand, you can see his heartbreak over this, like, because, you know, he feels like he probably contributed to that. And yet on the other hand, he's just like, you know, this community's kind of like eating their own, like where, you know, and so I think he's trying to make this statement, and it's messy, you know, and I think like all things, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, Dave Chappelle is this hero of our culture and he's standing up for what needs to be stood up for. But I think he's also at a place where he has the money and the safety net to where he can say some things that are going to make people feel really uncomfortable, to where we're going to maybe have conversations. I mean, we're talking about it right now. So I guess in Europe, I mean, as I've shared this, what you know about this, I mean, do you think that these conversations are going to help us in this discourse, or does it make it messier? Does it make it more difficult? better, worse? I mean, I don't know. There's a lot there. I think there's a lot to unpack.
There is a lot to unpack, and I think it makes it difficult because obviously with all of us, like, we have a heart to understand and to love others. And the way that Dave communicates has always been like, I've like this and like any other special he's done, I'm like, is it okay for me as a Christian to like, how do I engage with this? Like, if I think this is funny, like, can I laugh? Because as I've come to understand him, and this has taken like work on my part to like get past a like judgment towards him, is what is he trying to do?
Yeah. Because
it is very graphic, the things he talks about. It is not like, I feel, have always felt like super valuable as a woman, like when I've heard like little stints of what he said. But I mean, it's the same as like listening to rap music. It's like there's a message in that. And so to me, it's like, okay, if I look at Dave, I'm trying to engage in a difficult part of culture for me, he's trying to send a message. What is that message? I don't think that it's necessarily that he hates the LGBTQ community. I think he's trying, like you're saying, to send a message. It is just very convoluted when we're not used to communicating like that. Like, I'm not going to come up to you and like, make some weird joke about how you look in your face and then...
At least not on the podcast. Right. Maybe in private.
I'll do it, in the privacy of my own home. You guys aren't there. But I'm just saying, like, there is a message that he's trying to send, but as we engage in this, I'm like, oh, he's got some guts, to like really push into this, because it is a hot topic in our culture, but it's also like one that I'm a little scared of still, even though I am trying my best to engage in it. It's okay. What can I say? What can't I say? Even though I strive so much for I want to engage and I don't want to be judgmental. I want to see both sides because I want to understand. And that's not me like pushing the easy button. It's me like literally as a Christian striving to, okay, what's the next thing I need to do to like be mature as a Christian, and like, can I engage with this?
Yeah, I think
there's a lot.
Yeah, comedy is just, it's one of those cultural things that, there's some comedians I like to listen to, but I'm not like overly into it. I don't go to like, I've got some friends that are really into comedy, and they'll go listen to anybody, and on a long trip or whatever, I'll listen. But I think it's one of those things that's so just interesting because the humor can cut into serious things in ways that nothing else can. It can disarm people in ways nothing else can. And so there's always like, I think the funniest, like there's a guy named Michael Jr. and he's a Christian guy and he makes fun of a lot of church stuff. But the reason it's funny is because it's true, And so like why it's funny is like, oh, I've had that thought. I've never said it out loud, or I've had that experience. I've never said that out loud. But there's always like there's this truth to it, but there's this okayness about like saying it because you're only saying it to be funny, and you just never, there's always this tension to manage of like, is that okay because it is true, but you're devaluing someone in the middle of it, or even devaluing yourself. A lot of times there's self-deprecation in comedy, and so it is one of those cultural communication tools that I think can lead to change.
Well, I would even argue that a pastor and a comedian have a lot in common.
Yeah.
Because the way that they are orating and they're up in front of people and they have to tell stories and little anecdotes and things to try to get their message across, because they have to disarm people to get, and I think there's a difference though. There are comedians who are just out there to tell jokes, just there to make people laugh. But then there are comedians like Chappelle who I think they are culture carriers who are trying to go out there and be activists in their comedy and make a difference in the world, at least in their own world, the way they think it should be. And so they kind of take this humor and they disarm people, or they shock people, and then they kind of swoop in with this message, for right or for wrong. But I do think that there's a kind of a parallel there where these two groups of people probably affect culture and the way we think. I mean, I would say more than a lot of people combined, like just their voices, pastors and comedians.
Yeah. Well, and it's something like I'm always trying to like my son, for example, he's 8. And so he'll just go up to his sisters and fart on them, right? Like, cause he thinks it's funny. And, and you're like, buddy, why do you,
stand-up,
why, yeah, I know, but you're like, why do you do that? And it's because obviously it's learned behavior, cause him and his cousins can run around and get away with it because to them it's funny. But you're like, buddy, why did you do that? Because I think it's funny. And it's like a learned behavior, but that's also nasty and crude and this weird thing. And so you're trying to teach people where like humor is, where it is allowed, who you can talk to about certain things and not, like, what are the pockets that is funny and degrading. And it's difficult. I have a sibling who's been on the podcast that is trans. And so I'm like, okay, we're going to talk about this. So I talked to them last night briefly, and I'm just like, so what do you think about Dave Chappelle? And just their comment from Precious was, one, in comedy is supposed to push boundaries. He knows what his audience is, and he knows that his audience probably isn't an LGBTQ type of audience. He's pulling to get laughs from bros is what. And so I think there was that, but then there was also like, as a part of the trans community, because we were talking about Daphne and how Daphne was someone who is a part of the trans community, like you said, that they ended up committing suicide and felt like they're really, berated by their own community, and that's what led to it. And nobody knows the exact answer.
What else she was going through, yeah.
But their thought, and I was like, and the family has been supportive of Dave through this, but Precious like, yeah, I think the trans community has a little different opinion, than Daphne's family, and it's one that I couldn't understand because I'm like, where's the truth in this, or what is right in this? And so but it was another opportunity to listen for me, which was great. And just how are you feeling about this? Like, what's good about this? What's bad about it? And it led to a good conversation about a lot of things outside of that, which was good.
I think the biggest red flag I see in all of this is surrounding cancel culture in general. You see people calling, call for Dave Chappelle's cancellation. But then you've seen also conservative media kind of co-opt this thing in a way to go, oh, finally, here's somebody who's going to speak their minds and say what needs to be said. And and now they're all of a sudden making this mold out of Chappelle, going, this is how we need to talk about this stuff. And I think that's just one of the bigger problems of it, is then you're going to it's not actually, even if Chappelle had good intentions in what he was doing, if he wasn't just out to defend himself, which sometimes it kind of felt like that too, it's like, where are we going to just miss the mark again on this in media? And I've already seen like several different YouTube channels and things like that where they're just taking this and going, okay, this is all the liberals are crying over this, and just making it into something that just totally defeats the purpose and disallows us to even have like a better conversation about it. And so I would hope that if anything out of this, it doesn't make anyone feel more empowered to just be like, well, we should all just be able to say what's on our mind and talk about things how we need to, and just be brutally honest. And it's weird because it goes both ways, because a lot of times the people who are saying that stuff are just as offended at the other side of the coin.
Yeah.
But yet they are saying everyone's offended at their values, at their culture, at their whatever, at their family, whatever it is. They're saying, accusing everyone of being offended at it, but yet they're only saying that because they're offended at what's on the other side.
Yeah. And I think the bigger problem for Christians, and that I even feel is the tension here that's bigger than all of that, is when we live in a culture that is you do you culture, that only goes so far, like you do you is not it. You can't have it both ways. You can't like say you do you, boo, and then also like never be offended, or when like there we have to come as a culture to some kind of standards of morality, and where do we find those is always kind of a mixed bag. But if we can't come to agreement, which I think ultimately points towards towards God, is our desire for morality and to legislate morality and all of that kind of stuff. I think as a Christian, how do we live in that tension where we live in a world that is very much like, when it's convenient, you do you, until I'm offended that you did something that, and so it is a tough thing to manage, and it does beg, I think, for a need of a God, of a creator, of a ruler that is sovereign, that does give us, ways to live. And we do find a lot of that truth in Scripture. But then how do we teach that? How do we model that without becoming Pharisees is always a thing that I'm praying through and asking the Spirit to invite me to be a part of. So,
All right, moving on to the next headline.
All right.
This one comes from Billboard.com. It says Ariana Grande gives away $5 million in free therapy for World Mental Health Day.
Yeah. So last week, October 10th, was World Mental Health Day. And I thought it was interesting. It's always interesting every year just to see like what comes from the hashtags and what comes from just what celebrities do, what happens in the news and media. And I just thought it was really cool that this got a lot of attention, obviously, because Ariana Grande is very relevant in culture right now.
Would you say?
Grande?
I like grand in culture. That's a bad joke.
Okay. And so just the fact that she's willing to put a huge amount of money towards free counseling was really cool for me to see that. And then that was just the one that I had picked out. But there was there was a tennis match over the weekend where the winner won. The prize pot was $50,000, and they pledged to donate all of their prize money towards mental health and research for that. And there was just a couple other celebrities that use their platforms in this way. And obviously mental health is something that I'm really passionate about. I feel very fortunate to be able to do that in a church as well, which I feel like is not super common to have a counselor on staff that's able to do that kind of thing, and just to have the voice that I have. And so I just want to talk a little bit about mental health in the church for us to just have a conversation around it, because I think it's still something that is very taboo, especially in the groups that I lead and just the conversations I have. There's just a lot of shame around it, but there's such a need for us to talk about those things, to have healing in that. But I think it's something that's kind of awkward too.
Yeah.
So, should Christians care about mental health? I think that they do, but I want to hear what you guys.
Yes.
They should. Yes.
My answer
it's important.
Is yes. Yeah, not just jokingly, but yes. And
I think I just kind of want to address it, because it is one of those things where that question, I think around this table, seems like such a no-brainer.
It does.
But I don't know that growing up in the church, at least, I can't speak for anyone else, but it always felt like there are other solutions for the problems that you are having, and not that the Bible and that other type in prayer isn't good, but there was a stigma around it so much that,
you can pray something.
We're in a place where we can make light of it, the answer being yes, but that's just because it seems so obvious to us now in hindsight. But I think there was a time where it was incredibly taboo.
Yes.
Not even as Christians, though. I think like in culture, American culture, too, in a big way, where we've had asylums and you've had a lot of ways that people just didn't know how to deal with
That's true.
People with mental struggles or over medication. I mean, the foster care system is just a mess when we don't want to get people the right kinds of, tools and interventions. And then you start to over medicate people or medicate them wrong. And so it's such a messy thing, even outside of just the church, that in our American culture has been crazy. And then you add in things like depression and war and all of those kinds of things, and how each generation responds to what mental health looks like, and toughness looks like, and grit looks like. It's just a mess. So
I also think that psychology has been such a slow moving, well, I guess if you didn't know progressing progression. Like I got my master's in 2014, so not long ago. And even then, you know, there were people in the church that I went to at the time saying like, why would you do psychology? Like this, I mean, you just need Jesus, or just the typical things that we might say. And I think that that's where even earlier in the episode today, I said, you know, if I don't understand something, I have to withhold some judgment. And that has been a lesson hard learned by me, like just being in the field that I am. But I do think that there's space, obviously, for our faith and for us to love on people that are struggling with mental health. I mean, statistically, like the CDC, 1 in 5 people have an unaddressed mental health issue. So if that's just a fact that we're ignoring, or we're trying to Band-Aid with something else, like, okay, that's a fact. And maybe we're not willing to address it, but it's something that's very relevant. Like as we're sitting in church, as we're talking to people, as we're addressing somebody that's maybe having a faith issue, how else are we able to love them, or maybe to speak truth into their lives, or to accept them? Accept somebody that has anxiety and depression, or bipolar, or PTSD, and not treat that person as someone that's like a leper or hands off, or you don't have a space or ability to lead or be a person in this church.
Well, accept them for admitting it, even, because I think there's a lot of undiagnosed depression, or even unadmitted depression, that goes on all over the place. And I mean, I think it's the one thing that probably, if we were to admit it, feeling isolated, feeling unaccepted, feeling alone is probably the one thing that would bond most Americans together if they were willing to admit it. Because I mean, why do we lash out? Why do we act the way we do? Why do we resort to the things that we resort to? And it's a common thread between humans, and I mean Americans especially, where, you know, we're Alex, you touched on it, like our grit and our ability to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, and that's who we have to be. Yeah. And to admit otherwise is to show weakness.
Yeah, I think some of the ways that it's come a long way in the church, and I think it's been forced, but I think it's good. But I mean, statistically, I remember always hearing like that one of the most suicidal, careers was being a pastor. That pastors, carry such a heavy load, and things like that. But I think not just because they carry heavy load and their stresses, but there's mental illness that happens to go along with that. We've seen pastors over the last, pastors that we would deem successful, that have pretty large platforms, deal with this, whether themselves, like Jared Wilson a couple of years ago, or in their family. Like, some of the biggest Toby Mack, we brought him up earlier. His son, ended up committing suicide, and he brought a huge awareness to that. You've got people like Rick Warren, the author of The Purpose-Driven Life, right? Like, if you could just find your purpose. His son, committed, suicide and had a mental illness, and so there's this awareness, I think, that's beginning to happen more and more inside of the church towards this. And it's just so hard because diagnosing it is deep. You've got to have the right people surrounding you, and it's invisible, in a lot of ways. It's an invisible issue, unlike if you broke your arm, or unlike if you had a tumor growing on the outside of your body or even inside your body. The visibility of it and what feeds it, just like a tumor can be fed, it's so nuanced. And so I think for a long time it was a marker of a weak faith. If you just had more faith in God, and I think by the grace of God, that stigma is being, Paul, that guy, I think you read Romans and you're like, that guy, there was something, maybe the mental illness was a thorn in his side. No one really knows, but he had probably some diagnosable things in his life. And so I think we've come a long way in the church, which is good.
One thing that I have found really empowering, just as a Christian engaging in mental health, especially in the church, is you hear the term stay in your lane, or like know your lane. And that is not in this case a negative connotation. Like, to me, that's very empowering. Like, if there's someone that has a mental illness or a struggle, you as the Christian, stay in your lane. And that's empowering to the fact of like, you do not have to take on that person, what that person is dealing with, what they're bringing. You do not have to take that onto yourself and fix all the problems. And I think like there's kind of an expectation in, okay, we need to pray for you and we need to do this or that. I think it's knowing like, okay, there's counseling for this. There are people that are trained to help you and like, hey, I'd love to point you in that direction, or let me pray for you, but also like, how are you caring for yourself? I mean, there's more that we can bring to the table. And so just being empowered in not knowing. I mean, even me, like there are times where I'll have conversations like I don't know the answers, and that's empowering because I can ask for help and we don't have to have all the answers around this.
I think it's important too to know that statistically Gen Z, you know, the next up and coming generation is more likely than any other generation to report that they're seeking help regarding their mental health. A study I read said 8 out of 10 report to having at least one traumatic experience in their life. And so I think there's a question that begs to be asked. Do we think Gen Z is just more disproportionately affected by traumatic experiences? Are they more mentally unhealthy than every other generation, or are they just more aware than any other generation? And how do we start to close the gap? You know, how do we start to have understanding between the, you know, hey, I lived through the Depression. I, you know, came from nothing. I walked uphill both ways. And there's a good in that. But how do we start to bridge those gaps? Because I don't think so. I don't think the answer is yes, that they're more mentally unhealthy than any other generation.
Yeah.
I think more aware for sure. What do you think?
I absolutely think that they are more aware. I think that it's multifaceted. I see parents that have not maybe processed through their stuff or had similar experiences, and they're like, I can do better and I want to do better. I want to break a cycle. I see a lot of that. And I see a lot of our culture right now is very accepting, like we've talked about, like we're exploring and we're saying like, what does this mean? We're asking questions that maybe generations before us did not get to ask. And I think because of that, we're uncovering mental health, or we're able to address it more. And it's accepted. It's something where, I mean, you go to TikTok and there's like mental health TikTok, and there's places where people are sharing their journeys. Now, that's not always maybe like the best place to go for mental health, like information and help and healing and all that stuff. But I do think that it's 100% like more awareness, but also more acceptance. And then just even going back to our article with that, Alex, of like Ariana Grande, I mean, a very relative person in culture right now, even to that generation that's saying like, hey, this is something I'm addressing. You address this too, and I'm putting money behind it. I mean, I'm excited for this generation.
Yeah. I think the problem I see though is I don't know if it's acceptance as much as it's prioritizing acceptance instead of prioritizing action.
Yep.
And so there's a big movement to, hey, we need to accept everyone and we need to accept all these things and we're all activists and, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
But there's just not a lot of action to back any of it up. And so I wonder.
You mean from people? Like people admitting?
Either way, whether in any of these topics, when we're talking about acceptance in general.
Right.
I think it's just, I think the term actions speak louder than words is one of those things that I think holds true. But specifically in mental health, there seems to be a lot of, there's this empowerment from admitting it, right? Like I have this problem, and I just worry though that because that is so publicized on TikTok and social media and it's glorified, that's where it ends a lot of times. And then people aren't actually going to seek the help that they need. It's just like they're self-diagnosing, they're armchair therapists or whatever, and they're just going, hey, I've got this problem. And then, okay, I did my thing, right? I'm and it's just like, well, not really. You haven't done the hard work that probably is involved with that. But then on the other side, you do have this older generation that you've mentioned, Alex, that's just, I did this on my own and I'm fine and whatever. But there's just, I think it's not that Gen Z has more mental health issues. It's just that the older generations had more undiagnosed mental health issues. And also, as we talk about this, then where's the baseline? For mental health, or when we have these conversations, we almost talk about it as if there is a baseline, that there's a perfect person out there somewhere who doesn't have any issues, and that's the thing that by saying, oh, it's so good that so-and-so is bringing up their mental health issues. I would dare to say most people have some form of a mental health issue. It's just, what is that? What form does it take? Is it manageable? Does it need treated? But when we talk about it as there are those that have mental health issues and those who do not, it really just separates the room.
You brought up a lot of really good points there. And I think it's, I can't think of another word, but it's sexy to have yourself figured out and say okay, I have this thing, and that owning my thing. And then it's also sexy to be at the end and say, I made it. I did all this, or I lost all this weight, or I worked through all of my trauma. Yeah. And we never very rarely do we see the in the meanwhile of the between the start and the finish. And that's where the hard work is, and where the really difficult nitty gritty stuff that helps you get to the end is the work is done.
Right.
So I think no matter what, we have a generation that is better able to articulate what's happening, and maybe there's words now because of where psychology's come from and all that. There's words to put to feelings more than probably ever. There's more permission to speak, oh, me too, than ever. And so I think a lot of it, as I think of how do I minister to this other generation, I think we have to be willing to listen more. Man, it'd be scary to be a certain age, 50, and then realize at that point I've dealt with all this and I had to go through all this because I had an undiagnosed, what would my life have been? And there's regret. There's a lot of feelings inside of that. And then there is the glorification, like you said, of so many different things. When it's become in vogue so much that we have to fight that tension of it not being an excuse for growth. We have to continue to grow. We have to continue to mature. And so sometimes we don't want to use that as a crutch but I never need to grow, or every time I made this mistake, it's because of that. And there's some validity to it, but there's also, some no, but we still need to challenge you to grow. We still need to challenge you to mature. And I think parents that are raising kids, there's already that natural tension there that the kid already knows more than the parent. And if a kid already does know more, it's not the blind leading the blind, but it's the blind leading the informed in some ways, and in so many ways in this new landscape of the internet and digital space and all this world. And so I think it's such a big thing to consider as we minister, as we lead small groups, as we do all of those things, that there's a big awareness about this, and we have to, as a culture and as Christians, consider what is it like to live in this tension. How do we grow? How do we continue to pray? How do we continue to trust in God's sovereign hand? How do we pray for miracles, even in the middle of this stuff? And just like any other kind of medical thing, cancer, I'm going to trust medical professionals, and yes, I'm going to pray for miracles. And I believe God can work in both of those ways. And I think in the mental health arena too, I don't want to not pray. I don't want to not ask that God would do miracles and things like that. And so,
it's mysterious. And sometimes it's just hard to accept that. I think even with our conversation with Josh Turk, last week, he talked about how he would go into churches and they'd always want to heal him of that, and it's just one of those things where, because someone doesn't get healed of something, isn't always a direct representation of their faith or where they are at spiritually. It's a mystery. But like you said, Alex, it doesn't mean we should not try, or not at least be faithful to God in those moments.
And I think a lot of companies are realizing the messes they've made. I think a lot of Googles and Apples, obviously social media, things like that do add to the frequency, I think, of it. Likes and reactions and things like that do add to my ability to feel judged more often, and that can lead into depression.
Which is so fascinating, because I think as those things came, like as Twitter came about and Facebook and things like that, even MySpace, I mean, to my generation, I think we looked at them as toys.
Yeah.
And that's what they weren't, anything more than that. You got everyone that came out when it came out. It's the new toy. I want that thing. Mm-hmm. And it's like, oh, this is fun. It's like a walkie-talkie. I can tweet this thing and someone tweets back
until
at
you
me.
drop out of someone's top 8 on MySpace.
Oh yeah, sure. But it kind of it had that kind of just, I don't know, fleeting thing where it was just this is just fun, whatever. It's not. But now you're right. It's become part of their lifestyle. Part of their identity is wrapped up now in social media, and I mean that's a scary thing to separate at this point. How do we do that healthily?
And operating systems are trying to like help with. I mean, like every day I think about my mental health probably more than I did 2 years ago, because I have like a thing that pops up on my watch that says like there's a mindfulness. Hey, just be and even take a time to breathe, and it's just giving me posture to like take healthy steps to consider that, to pray, to do things that I wouldn't. And so it's fascinating how even, big tech companies are realizing this.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're realizing it, it's a problem, man, more so the church should be addressing this. And I think we are, and making a lot of good progress towards that. So
Absolutely. So how would you guys say that you prioritize your mental health, or do you?
I mean, Alex just said that
so you
his
do.
iPhone prioritizes it for him.
I mean, it does. It helps
Your
me.
Apple Watch helps. And that counts.
It helps me, like, literally, there's a notification I get at 4:45 every single day that says, pray for patience. Because patience is not like something that I need to pray that the Spirit would fill me up with patience, because I have no clue what I'm walking into when I get home. So literally, like I a couple years ago, or actually earlier this year, I'm like, man, I'm not very patient when I get home, which leads to not good mental health for me and then my family and all the ramifications of that. So I was like, I'm going to put that notification in every day. And so every day, like usually that's when I'm driving home, and it causes me to pause, and there's spiritual stuff that happens there, but I think also mental stuff that happens there. And I need your help. I need to leave what I just finished where it was, at the door, at work, or whatever that, and I need to pray for patience and be engaged to my family in that. Or it is when I get those notifications, on my watch that say to breathe. It's okay. I'm going to take that 60 seconds to just be still, to breathe, to be cognitively aware of that. Because if you are just never aware of it, then I think it starts to snowball. So those are a few of the things, being plugged into, healthy community where I'm having some of those conversations, doing some different counseling at times, or even knowing when I need to escape and get away from, I'm not perfect, but all of those have played a piece at different times into, my mental health journey, I would call it, because it is a journey. So
for me, it's that guy that comes up on TikTok when I've been scrolling too long and
Eric,
says, you need to go to bed. I know it's easy to keep scrolling, but you should. No, I don't know. I jokingly say that, but I try to listen to that person.
Is that really a thing?
Yes.
Yeah. Have you never scrolled that long?
I've never scrolled that long.
Yes. Eric and I look at each other like.
Oh, I get that quite frequently.
Well, how long do you have to scroll?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to know. I don't think, because
I'll send it to you the next time I get it. So
wow.
Yeah. There's it's like from the TikTok, their official account, like a video comes up and they're like,
your brain cells are dying.
Yeah. I think I kind of always, I always would kind of hide away into myself. So it's really, it's always hard for me to admit that I'm prioritizing, because I think sometimes that can look very selfish to an outside world of like, oh, this is what I need to maintain my mental stability sometimes. But I don't know, so much of, I think where I thought I went out the window with 2020, just mentally just grappling with the changes in different dynamics, whether it's family or culture or work or whatever it might be. There's just so much there that, I would even admit that there's probably parts of me that, I probably would benefit from counseling, and that I haven't been brave enough to go to that step, and I think a lot of people are in that same boat where they're like, I just haven't made that decision to do that. And but yeah, a lot of times for me, I mean, it's I have to just find something that's kind of, you find the thing that's brain numbing that you can. I mean, I play video games all the time, and it's one of those things where it is the only thing I can do where it doesn't allow all the other thoughts in, and because it takes up all my senses, except for smell and taste. I mean, you can maybe
You're
snack.
still able
if your wife has something in the crock pot.
Yeah, I know. That's true. But it is one of those things where it's like that. But then I don't know if that's good mental health or just a coping mechanism. But it is one of those things where I have to find that kind of solace where I can just tune out all the things that are going on in my brain.
To me, when I'm doing counseling, like both of the things that you said would be like, check, like that counts. Anything that you're doing that you enjoy, that enables you to have some ground that you're able to take back. Like if you're just mentally overloaded or something that you need to do to be just prepared to face the next day, if that's like having alone time, if that's taking a drive, if that's asking for, time away, like I just need to take a walk, time away from my family. For me, for the past couple of years, it's been CrossFit and just a couple different things that I've been like hobbies that I've been able to incorporate into my life. But it just has kind of gotten to the point. I don't know if it was 2020 or just being a counselor, and just I have like the absolute honor of holding some very like difficult things for people and just holding space for them, where I have chosen to seek counseling for myself. So it's like, I'm a counselor that sees a counselor. Like that's like, let's normalize that too. Or just to have somebody that's kind of unbiased to bounce off like, hey, this is how I'm feeling. And there's a lot of things like, especially if you're in leadership, or it doesn't matter really where you're at. Like you just kind of need somebody to download on, and to have somebody that maybe have some fresh insight into your life. So that's for me, what's really helped. But I just think like the amazing thing about how God has made each of us is, you were made with all the stuff that makes you awesome, Eric, and same with you, Alex. And so how we're going to achieve and like take care of ourselves is going to look completely different.
Yeah.
So there's also no space to judge like, hey, you're feeling a lot better than I am, and we've been like doing this the same. It's like God has made us different, and that's such a beautiful and precious thing. So
awesome.
And we podcast.
Yeah.
It's probably the best thing sometimes for my mental health, and the worst thing
you get
for
to
your
see
mental
us.
health.
Oh, and you get to see us.
I mean, honestly, because you being in spaces where you're having conversations about things is good, because it forces you to think, to have empathy, and this has helped me in that. But then at the same time, there's insecurities, those lights turn off. You said, did I say that right? Crap. You get messages that are not always kind, and then maybe you do get kind messages. It's like so up and down. And so if you want to take a roller coaster mental health journey, start a podcast.
That's true. On that note, I think we should end this podcast, so we can all get some well-deserved mental health time. Now, this has been good. This is one of those, for me, this is always a fun way to do an episode where we kind of bring a lot of different topics and cover a lot of ground in a short period of time. So thanks for everybody bringing those thoughts and ideas, and thanks for everyone who was listening. We really appreciate your time, because we know that's valuable, and we hope that this helped you in some way, or at least encouraged you. If you have any questions or concerns, you can send us a message on social media at CCC Omaha, or you can send us an email to podcast@cccomaha.org. Until next time, we'll talk to you then.